You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk.
Number 333.
Hello and welcome back to another irregular podcast here on the Outdoor Station. This is the second part of the interview with David Lintern, who recently completed a 500-mile journey along the border of France and Spain using the high mountain routes of the Pyrenees, mostly the HRP, and wild camping on the way, including a week's detour into Spain and the Ordesa Canyon during his 60-day trip. In the first part, he talked about his preparations and the gradual changes which came over him as he left his normal urban world behind. Here we begin to get into the nitty-gritty of the trip, the people and the equipment needed. Plus, of course, the commitment and costs of taking 60 days off work. Please view his blog while you listen to this, which is selfpowered.net, as it's full of images from the trip, and there are plenty of eloquent, amusing and interesting observations of the people he met and the places he travelled through. We continue where David starts to describe some of the people he walked with and the strangers he met en route, who soon became good friends.
Certainly, there's the people that I was walking with who, I think it's fair to say, I don't think they'd mind me saying, they had sort of different levels of experience. So sometimes there were one or two interesting moments because of that, and I had to, I had to look again at sort of my role in that and whether I was leading or not, and sort of step up to the plate a little bit in that way, because I had to sort of make sure that I tried to look after the people that I was walking with, my friends. And I didn't always get that right, I have to say. So there's the people that came along with me, and then there's another guy that I met and mentioned earlier, Andy, who he's actually someone who got in touch with me before the walk started through the blog, and just was asking sort of questions about stoves and this, that and the other. I mean, I'm hardly an expert, but anyway, I tried to answer the best I could. And anyway, we sort of said, oh, well, look, I might see you in Lescun. And as it turns out, we bumped into each other. And then much later on, we basically walked most of the last stage, the last week or so together. And the great thing about Andy is that he's quite a naturalist. He knows quite a lot about flora and fauna, and I'm very much playing catch up on all that stuff. And it was just great to walk with him, and it's just a whole nother layer. I'm sure, hopefully, some of your listeners are preaching to the converted. They'll be thinking, "Oh God, this bloody idiot is just a walker." But walking with Andy, that really showed me. It really opened it up. So I've bought myself a small pair of binoculars now, and I'm going to be getting a bird book and a flower book, and I'm really interested in sort of opening that up. And we were talking about rock formations, and I'm quite interested in geology, so that was my little contribution to that thing. So walking with Andy, that's the first person, and just to sort of talk about, he was really a really interesting bloke to walk with, and lots of ideas about what constitutes wild land and this, that and the other. And then there were, let's see, we've got bumped into someone from a Swiss girl called Sarah, and she was also great. She's an absolute nutcase. She basically, she's a teacher in Switzerland, and basically she the last day of school she'll get on a train, and she'll come back the day before she has to be back at school in September or end of August. And she basically spends, or has spent, every day of her summer holiday for the last 7 years walking either in the Pyrenees or in the Alps. And her approach is not to, basically she just gets the maps and decides where she's going on the day. So, hats off to her. She's sort of really adventurous character. And there's kind of nothing of her as well. A real sort of, sort of a real sort of slip of a thing. And, but she was like sort of, afterwards we were like, Jedi Master, this girl really knows what she's doing. Fantastic character. And then an American guy that, he was very into, it was his first time in Europe walking, and he was very into his ultralight kind of stuff. So for him, it was very much about he'd shipped all his food in, and it was kind of like it was very much a sort of an exercise in testing strategies and equipment and that kind of thing. And I think he was also really enjoying the walk, but that side of things was quite strong for him. Another English couple we met, who I think Jan and Chris, I met them in the first week, both in the, I think they sort of early retired, and sort of once I found out that they'd retired early, I said, also, they're really, really fit. They were walking me into the ground, and I said, so why aren't you doing the whole thing? And they said, oh well, we've got a climbing holiday and a biking holiday to do after this. So the Pyrenees was just the warm up for them. So no, the people, I mean, or kind of obviously, really, the people you meet are great, and especially if you're walking on your own, then it's easier to meet people, and it makes those, because you spend some of your time on your own, it means that when you do meet up with people, then those encounters are, they mean something, and you get to know people quite quickly, I think. So I really, I really valued that, and a lot of the time, I guess, our meetings with people are quite fleeting and transitory and a bit rushed sometimes, I think, in the city, and certainly it can be for me. So you meet lots of people, but you don't necessarily always spend as much quality time with them as you'd like. And I think one of the nice things about doing something like this is, because it's a longer walk as well, you give yourself time to meet people and meet them in a nice way. Meet them I bumped into someone that might be known to some of the listeners, a guy called Humphrey Waitman. So, I mean, just totally randomly, I'd never met him before, but I'm sort of familiar with him through reading about the TGO and that kind of thing, and that was fantastic. So we just spent an hour and a half talking to Humphrey, and he's got a wealth of information about the Pyrenees. He's been walking there, I think, probably for about 12 years. So, I mean, he really is the fountain of all knowledge as far as I was concerned. I was blown away by how much sort of political and economic and social history he knew about especially the Eastern Pyrenees. He's just, he was amazing.
And he also knows all the good places to eat as well.
Yeah, no, very, and drink as well. Full of practical tips, and as well as all the sort of the historical and political background. So it's great. That side of things was great, because you just we all have our own way of doing things, and I have mine, and which is different to everyone else's, or different to a lot of people's, and so it's nice to get a different context, isn't it? Like sort of with Andy, it was the sort of the naturalist stuff, and with Humphrey, it was sort of definitely the sort of history and the food and drink and that kind of thing. So and with Matt, the American guy, it was very much about kit and sort of getting lots of tips off him about kit, and so it's great, that side of things. It's wonderful.
What about the sort of the people you observe, the day trippers and the tourists, shall we say, the short walkers or section walkers or whatever? Again, on the blog, you sort of make some comments about people being part of the environment and people being existing on top of the environment, as it were. Any observations you've got about people on that?
Yeah, I don't think I was necessarily meaning sort of day trippers or as vis-a-vis sort of through hikers or whatever. I think people can engage on. I think any level of engagement is a great thing. I mean, it's the outdoors, and I, for example, right now I'm sitting looking out of my window. I'm looking at a brick wall. That's the view I have out of my window. I'd prefer it if it was different, but that's the way it is. So any level of if we can get out, and if you can only get out for half a day, then hey, that's great. But certainly, what I found, because this is the longest stretch of time I've spent walking, I definitely felt like I was more embedded in the environment or in the experience because I gave it the time. And I know this is something you mentioned Chris Townsend earlier, and that's something that obviously he speaks very eloquently about. To be honest, in a sense, the the mileage is irrelevant. What's important is the time. And so as you sort of, as you become fitter and the kind of the stresses of, your complicated relationship, work life, kind of, as they kind of get, as they're, the longer you walk, the further they seem away. Certainly I felt closer to the experience after a few weeks or after a month. And then, by the end, it's quite confusing because you're, it's kind of all you know how to do, really. The first time we saw the sea, I did think, well, that's it then. What am I going to do after this? That's quite. I'm sure. Yourself and other people will recognise perhaps that feeling is kind of, well, this is kind of me. I get up in the morning and I walk. This is so what happens after? It was a little bit. It was alarming. I was concerned. It genuinely took me by surprise because the longest I'd ever sort of backpacked for was 2.5 weeks. So that thing at the end that happened, we got up onto the top of a mountain, Canigou, which is got the sort of the last big one in the east, and you can see the sea on the top of there, and I did have no, it's just grit in my eye. I know, honestly, sort of, I was a bit of a. I had a bit of a few moments up there where I was genuinely wondering, well, maybe we should just turn around and walk back. So can we?
Do you know? There's a customer we've got that does that. He walks the coast of Spain, and he gets from obviously from to the end point, and then he just turns around and walks back again. And that's how he spends his time. He comes home for a very short period of time, sort of a few weeks, a month or so, to sort things out, and then he goes again.
Wow.
And it sounded ridiculous at first hearing, and then, once you've experienced that sensation of the open road, as it were, and some of the benefits it can bring, you think, well, actually, why not? If you can afford to do it, why not?
With over 1 million listeners worldwide, The Outdoor Station is the leading online audio resource for those into the great outdoors.
Because in the States they call it yo-yoing, don't they? I read about that before and thought, well, that seems a bit pointless. But having been there now, I can see how coming back the other way would be a completely different walk. Because the other thing that happens on a long walk, of course, is that you get a sense of the seasons changing. I mean, and at the start of the walk, it was 35 degrees in the shade. And by the end of the walk, we had, it was -7 a couple of nights. So, and you're losing an hour or an hour and a quarter off the, it's the sun setting an hour and a quarter earlier. So, that sense of being embedded in the walk or in the land, or, certainly in the walk anyway, that's even, because you're walking such a long way, or for a long time rather, because the seasons are changing as well, that really, the whole thing becomes, you're sort of part of this sort of cyclical process. And so that really helps with the kind of feeling in touch side of things, which is how, I guess that was your original question, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the other couple of things this leads on to then, before we start talking about kit and sort of bring things to an end, is the technology. What are your thoughts on people that carry technology with them, their entertainment, their contact, their systems or whatever? And do you think people are scared of keeping things simple, of the basics, of being away from technology and having to rely on themselves?
Okay, it's kind of, there's sort of a few different strands there. So for me, what I had was I used an iPhone, and because I was doing the walk for charity, I did feel like, certainly for those people who donated, I felt like it was by way of a little thank you, if for no other reason. I wanted to kind of keep them in touch. So when I could, I wasn't kind of, I didn't come down to send, to blog or to send photos. But when I could, when there was reception, I did, upload a photo to Twitter or Facebook or wherever it was. And I kind of felt like that was part of my, if you like, my role as a sort of, my role as a fundraiser, really. And just to kind of keep people engaged. And just as an aside off that, people did seem to, well, not a few people that I've spoken to since, they genuinely appreciated that level of involvement. They engaged more, they engaged in the story, if you like, because it's nice to follow that stuff, and it just means that they're not just giving to like a sponsored walk and they're not hearing anything about it. So that's what I did. That's what I chose to do. I'm a bit loath to say, there's rules and what worked for me should be how everyone else does it. So if people want to carry technology stuff with them and that helps them get out and helps them feel comfortable, then that's kind of okay. I mean, obviously, there is a point where I would also argue where if you're carrying everything with you and if you put that in front of the walk and the experience, then you can't. For me, that would be, I'd feel like I was missing out. So, I mean, I definitely take your point about simplicity. I mean, it's kind of all about that, isn't it? I mean, that's where for me the kind of the lightweight side of things. I mean, we'll get onto gear in a minute, but that's where for me the lightweight thing makes a whole heap more sense. It's not just gear for gear's sake. It's actually gear to strip things down. If you're stripping things down, they become lighter, but they also become more simple. And then you're going to have a more direct experience. So I mean, I always go back to, if it's good on whatever level people can get out, and if they want to carry a phone with them to make them feel safe, or a GPS. I mean, I don't tend to use a GPS, but if that's what it takes to get them out, then that's great. But obviously, you don't want to be surrounded by all the stuff that you have when you're not out, because then you might as well be in. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question in a very indirect way.
Well, that leads us nicely on to the equipment you took with you. Obviously, we've referred to it a few times that you had great consideration towards keeping things simple and keeping things light. So just give us sort of a basic overview of sort of the gear that you took, the rucksack you carried and the sort of things you had in it on a daily basis.
So again, because I'm new to backpacking, I'm sort of fairly new to the lightweight thing, and certainly the lightweight thing certainly helped me get. I think to be honest, I would have struggled to do this walk if I was still carrying around sort of 15 kilograms or whatever I was doing when I was 16. Before I stopped because it all got too heavy. So the bag was a Go Light Pinnacle. I think actually I might have bought that from you and Rose a year or two ago. The base weight was around about, I think it ended up being around about, give or take a couple of 100 grams, it was about 9 kilos. And of course, that doesn't allow for food and water, which once you start adding that in, it gets very quickly, it gets quite uncomfortable, particularly if you're doing, I don't know, 1,000 meters or 1,200 meters before lunchtime. So, which the ascents and descents on the HRP are pretty heavy duty. So yeah. But what the great thing about that, just without getting into too much detail, the great thing about the Pinnacle is that you can effectively you can pack it quite small, and then it's got that sort of bit at the top, which I kind of view as my food store. It kind of the roll top thing allows you to sling a load of food in on the top. Your food's generally the heaviest thing, so I generally pack that nearer the top, and so that big capacity was great for this walk. It just meant that because the resupply points sometimes in the middle of the walk were sort of 7 to 10 days, so you're packing a lot of food. So that's a sort of a brief resume.
Mm-hmm. And then sort of sleeping system, shelter system.
Okay, so one of the new things that I got for this trip, which was untested, was I bought a synthetic quilt, and that worked out well, except for let's deal with what was good about it. What was good about it, I didn't miss the insulation on the bottom at all. That was absolutely fine, as a lot of people have written on other blogs. You compress the insulation when you lie down on it anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. What was not so good about the quilt was that I did miss the sort of the cocooning around your head. So it did mean that I always had to wear a hat, and I always had to usually I was wearing my down jacket in underneath the quilt as well. But I'd kind of devised that, I'd effectively cut a bit of weight with the quilt.
What actual quilt was it? What make was it?
It was I got it's a quilt made by Mountain Laurel Designs, an American cottage industry he works out of his garage, I think, and it's called a Spirit 30, and synthetic. The synthetic thing's great because it means it dries very quickly. I was using it with a bivy bag, so condensation can be a bit of an issue, but if you're using a synthetic, so that was about, I think it was about 500 grams, give or take. And then I had my down jacket on most of the time, except in the last sort of week or two when it got very warm again. But in the middle, I didn't find it warm enough, I have to say. I mean, and that's also partly to do with the weather, obviously, because we weren't expecting, 3-day thunderstorms and hail and snow and lightning storms and all sorts of things that happened in the middle. But generally speaking, it was a good buy, and it did save a bit of pack weight. So.
Okay, so the bivy bag and the sleeping mat, what was that?
The bivy was another MLD thing, and also the shelter I used, a Trail Star, which are now becoming quite popular here in the UK, and the Trail Star I absolutely love. It's a brilliant device. The best thing about the Trail Star is that there's nothing to break on it. So it did. We had some, as I've just mentioned, we had some horrendous. I've had the worst storms I've ever been in on this trip. I woke up in 2 inches of rain one night. The pole, the wind got so bad that the pole fell out of the tent twice. But the thing is, all that stuff happens. If any tent that I've ever slept in had been in those conditions, the poles would have snapped or guys would have ripped. Basically your tent would have been trashed. I think my tents that I've had in the past would have gone. Or in fact, there was even one night when one of the guys I was walking with, he brought with him a North Face. It's like a 5-season. It's like a bomber tent, and that actually blew away. We had to run after it and catch it, and the Trail Star was still standing. So the Trail Star was great. The sleeping mat was another new thing, and I don't know if I should mention sort of brands or names. But
I do. It's always interesting.
It wasn't a huge success, has to be said. It was a POE Ether Elite, and for the first 2 weeks, it was again, it was brand new. I've always shied away from inflatables because I thought, well, if you're blowing it up, surely it can pop. Anyway, first 2 weeks, really, really super comfortable. Why didn't I do this years ago? It's just great. I'm getting such good night's sleep. And then after about 2 weeks, the valve went. And from what I can gather, I'm not the only one who's
If it's the full length one, it's the first batch had a few valve issues.
No, this was a 2/3 one, and I only bought it in June. So. So I understand the company has had some recall issues.
Okay.
But hopefully they'll get that ironed out, because otherwise it was a really, really comfy thing. And I was thinking, this is great. This is like the best thing I've ever got ever. I was loving it until of course you're blowing it out 4 or 5 times a night, in which case the novelty wears off pretty quickly.
Yeah, indeed. I had a very similar experience myself in Scotland.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's not fun.
No. So for footwear, with the train you were going over, what did you stick to trail shoes, or were you wearing boots?
Okay. So this is the thing, because I'm still getting used to the whole lighter weight deal, basically. And because I was carrying, at some points I was carrying a lot of weight, I haven't as yet gone the whole hog with trail shoes. I use trail shoes for day hikes, and I still sometimes use boots for through hiking, because if I'm carrying sort of 10, 12 kilos, I'd like to get it down lower than that, but I'm still a little bit nervous about my ankles. So that's a work in progress for me. So, cut a long story short, the first 2 weeks I used Keen Targi 2s. Waterproof membranes in the Pyrenees, absolutely don't do it. Won't do it ever again. Just take yours and Andy's and Humphrey's advice always in the future, and I'll just use, basically waterproof less, no liner shoes. And basically what happened after 2 weeks was that there was a lot of rain on stage 2. I was helping out a mate and carrying some of his sort of excess weight. And my feet started to rot, basically. I started to, because the liner wasn't letting the water out. And we had rain. It was really soggy for on and off for a good week. And the targies otherwise were great, but that liner was just a disaster. And I got really, I got quite alarmed because my feet were in quite a state. As I said, it's a work in progress for me. I'm trying to get more and more comfy, and what's happening, it's working. I'm strengthening my feet. So, because I'm coming from a place where I used to wear big old, Brashers or Mendels or whatever. So anyway, what I did then is that my girlfriend came out to do the section of the walk that she planned to do, and I asked her to bring. I had a pair of Innovate 370s, so they're basically like trail shoes, but they've got ankles. They're the Paraboot version, but they're not lined. And literally, the day I put those on, my feet never looked back, and I had healthy pinkies all the way through for the next sort of 5 weeks. So they were absolutely genius. And really annoyingly, Innovate don't make. They only make their boots with Gore-Tex at the moment. So I'm sort of I keep on. Well, I don't keep on, but I send the occasional Twitter to them to sort of say, what's happening with the 370s? Have you started producing them again? Because I understand that a lot of other people would quite like that as well. They seemed like quite a popular boot at the time, and I missed all of that. Of course, the first time I just managed to find a pair that were hanging around in someone's warehouse, and bought them earlier on this year to try them out, and they worked really well.
On the clothing front, then, presumably you had sort of one set of dry, one set of wet wearing clothes and so on? Or did you have a few more changes in your wardrobe?
No, it was mostly I used an ME shirt, a mountain equipment shirt that was just sort of like a summer hiking shirt. I can't remember the name of the sort of the brand, if you like, for that, but that worked well. And that was mainly my day, and then I had a thin merino top that I slept in, and it was pretty much kind of like day, and I'd have a day change and a night change, basically. The best item, or the item I was sort of got quite excited about, and you may think this is a bit weird because it was only a pair of shorts, was a pair of shorts, and they were a pair of Montane running shorts, and they were absolutely genius because basically they're a bit like swimming trunks. So it negates the need to wear any, if you're, pardon the sort of slightly sensitive area, it negates the need to wear underwear. So, which is great because if it's a hot day, then you keep cool and breezy all day, and it also means that there's less clothes to wash. You can just wash the shorts through in a stream every day or two, and then put them straight back on, and within half an hour they were dry. So they were absolutely brilliant. They were just such great things, and I can't remember the name of they're bright orange, about sort of £25, and I can't remember the name of the particular brand, but they were made by Montane.
Podcasting around the world.
Award-winning producers of podcasts to inform, inspire, entertain, and encourage people to enjoy a healthy outdoors lifestyle.
So you're obviously keeping things simple on the clothing front. The final question has to be, of course, the cooking system. About the only thing that you haven't mentioned, really.
Okay. I was using earlier on in the year. I got in touch with Trail Designs, and because the walk was for charity, they didn't donate me the whole thing, but they kind of helped me out, if you like. They part donated as did you, and we'll come on to that in a minute. Part donated the cooking system. I used a Try, which is basically Esbit, meths and wood. So this was a 3 fuel system. With their fantastic little caldera kind of cone thing, and that wrapped around a pot that yourself at Backpacking Light kindly donated, which was the 900 mil Avenue pot, which again was absolutely fantastic. It's brilliant system. The whole thing worked really, really well. And the reason, I suppose, the main reason it worked really well is because of this 3 fuel system. So most of the time, despite the fact that I was walking for up to 10 days without resupply, most of the time I wasn't carrying any more than half a litre of meths, because I was able to supplement that with a couple of little Esbit blocks and wood. So even when there was no wood high up above the tree line, there's about 2,600, 2,700 metres, quite a lot higher than it is in the UK. But, we might collect wood lower down, and then if we looked at the map and we know, right, we're going to pitch high tonight, then we were able to kind of be sensible about what fuel you were carrying and how much you're carrying. So it's a great system, that Titrite. It worked really, really well. I suppose the only thing I'd say about the meths is that if you're using it as a 3 fuel system, obviously you get a lot of carbon build up on your pan, and that can take some of the efficiency out when you're using it then with Esbit or meths. So there's a sort of a cleanliness issue, if you like. So every now and again I'd have to really, really scrub the pan just to get all the carbon build up off. But otherwise, it worked great. It was a perfect solution.
So just one pan, one mug, I presume, and a spork, and that must have been it?
Yeah, that was it for me. And actually, even when my girlfriend joined me, we just made do with the 900 ml pot, and she brought out another cup. We got 2 sort of plastic Woolies mugs, and nothing fancy, nothing titanium. So yeah, between the two of us, we had one just under a litre pot and 2 half pint cups, and that was us. Yeah.
So that packs away quite nicely inside the Pinnacle. Did you have a luxury item, something you'd class as a luxury item?
Well, I had the iPhone, which of course is in some people's book is a luxury. I suppose my luxury, my one little bit of moral support, if you like, was I had I don't really play that well, but I had a harmonica. So I had 53 grams of G major stashed in my Pinnacle side pouch, and actually it was a bit of a giggle really, and I got a bit better at playing it, but actually it's sort of, on those times when you're feeling a bit low, or you're kind of a bit tired, you have a bit of a play, a bit of a pop on your harp, and it was a nice little thing. So I was quite glad that I packed that. And no other. I don't think, not off the top of my head, no other luxuries apart from those 2.
So let's just conclude then. You sort of came down from your walk at that turning point where you suddenly saw the sea, and you suddenly realised it was over. And if you're anything like me, you then start thinking about all the things you're going to go back to, or what you've got to do, and all the lists that you've spent the last few weeks getting rid of in your head have suddenly reappear of jobs to be done on this invisible list. But I presume the ending there was no great firework display at the ending. It was sort of a sit down, have an ice cream or a beer, and a paddle in the sea. It was
exactly that. And I think by the time I walked in with Andy, the chap I mentioned earlier, and by the time we both got to the end of our 2-month walk, by the time you get there, you've already arrived, and as you say, you're starting to think about, okay, well, I basically spent the last 3 days kind of getting used to the fact that this thing's going to be over. And I guess you're doing a little bit, without getting too deep. You're doing a bit of mourning about it. You're kind of you sort of like you're feeling like, okay, I feel quite sad that this is the end, but also starting to think about, well, starting to kind of go over what you might have learned, what's changed. And certainly, when we got to the beach, we went straight into the sea, And then we had a good old paddle around, and floating was wonderful. Just floating in a very salty a warm, salty Mediterranean was amazing. Just literally just taking the weight off. And we got out and went to the ice cream parlour and went and got a couple of beers and sat on the beach and sat there for quite a lot too long, actually. Sort of drinking a beer or two and having a kind of a very normal afternoon on the beachfront, really.
Well, for people who would like to tackle something like this, time aside away from work, do you have a sort of a rough figure of what something like this costs from a practical point of view? The actual, I suppose, well, aside from the actual getting there and getting away again, I suppose, the actual doing the walk.
If we take away, okay, so let's take away the cost of equipping for it, and also I'm going to take away some of the costs of some of the food costs, because I probably had about half or 2/3 of my food brought in, or I took it with me as well. I think I probably spent just on the walk, the odd refuge, resupply, and that was it. I probably spent in the region of about 1,200 quid. Obviously, if you are resupplying 100% from those places along the way, then it's going to cost you a bit more, although not maybe massively more. Maybe it might go up a little bit. But the caveat to mention with that figure, which is fairly low for a 2-month trip, the caveat to mention is that we only stayed in paid refuges twice. We stayed in a hotel once in the middle of the trip. That was a kind of treat for Tanya and I when we got to Saladu, is that we had sort of 2 nights booked in a it's a very low key sort of hotel above a bar, a very, very nice place. So basically you're looking at sort of 4 nights of accommodation that we paid for. Obviously, if you did what a lot of the French section hikers were doing, and you moved refuge to refuge, then you're looking at probably around about £40 or £50 a night, which of course, I couldn't have done the trip on that kind of budget. I didn't have the sort of the money, and obviously the other thing to factor is that if I'm self-employed, so there's also loss of earnings. If you start looking at that, then you never do these things. But that's I suppose a factor.
So I mean, you haven't really said, but I'm assuming that you'd recommend the walk. It was a great experience that you look back on fondly, and you would recommend other people to give it a go. Yeah,
it's. I think I might have used the word right at the very beginning. One of the great things about this walk is that it's so diverse. So I would absolutely wholeheartedly recommend it. It is a challenge to do the whole thing. I'd also kind of recommend it's worth if you're a bit unsure, it's worth dipping your toe and maybe doing a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, doing a section of it. There's loads of there's a bit of information on my site, and there's a bit of information on Andy Howe's site. There's a lot of information, really good information on Andy Howe's site for kind of first trips. It's how I kind of found out a bit more. He's really good on giving access to information about how you might start thinking about doing something in the Pyrenees. That's Must Be This Way, his blog, just coming back to the variety thing. I mean, you move from the sea, the Atlantic Sea. You're moving through the Basque Country, which is green rolling hills, very tricky navigation. Then you're coming up into I guess the High Pyrenees, some really challenging terrain, boulder fields, snow fields, glacier country, very temperamental weather potentially. And then down on the other side, you come through one place we haven't mentioned at all, is you come through, spend a whole 10 days or nearly 2 weeks coming through Andorra. And it's just the most amazing wild camping country. Just for anyone who's into their wild camping, don't go there. Andorra's the valleys are kind of trashed with ski resorts and whatnot, but high up, it's just this incredible wild camping, just wild camp after wild camp. It's just paradise and just amazing. And then finally down into the Mediterranean. And of course, once you get over those last two mountains, Carlet and Canigou, into the Eastern Pyrenees, the vegetation changes and the rock changes, and it starts to become a lot more Mediterranean. It gets warmer. So there's just this huge variety there. It's not just one thing. If you do the whole walk, you move through the season. I moved through, from a wet summer to a dry summer to, I guess, the end of summer. And you're going through all this different terrain and all these different cultures. It's absolutely fantastic. So in short, absolutely recommended. And yes, get out there and do it. Yeah, fantastic walk.
Well, David, thanks very much indeed for your time and certainly detail on such an enjoyable 2 months, wasn't it? 2 months.
Yeah.
We certainly feel like I shared it with you, and reading the blog, which I'll direct people to again, it certainly gives people a lot more flavour and idea with the pictures and so on, exactly what terrain, what sort of challenges they might be facing, and also what you went through yourself. So it makes for a fascinating read. It's a very eloquent read, so it's really enjoyable. So thanks for that, and thanks for your time. But one final question, of course, is, of all the things I could have asked you, what should I have asked you about the trip?
No, I should have predicted you were going to ask me that. I think we've. There's nothing I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe I'll come back to you. There's, I suppose, possibly the one thing that it would be nice to mention is the two charities that I did the walk for.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, we haven't touched on that.
No, it's fine. But the basically, I mean, I had it in my head that I was going to do this thing anyway, and then I thought, well, I work for a charity here in London called Sound Mix, which provides arts. Basically, we do arts and music with refugee kids. So that was one charity. And the other charity that I tried to raise a bit of money for was a charity called the John Muir Trust, who I think will probably be known to a few of the listeners, certainly a few of the people who do TGO, because a lot of people who walk in Scotland will have walked across some of the land. So the John Muir Trust, and they're a conservation and education charity as well. So and that should anyone want to. No pressure, but should anyone want to, the link for that page, which is still open, people can still donate. The link for that is on the blog. So, yeah.
My thanks to David for taking the time to share his experience with us. And in these dark and gloomy times, I hope the conversation has lifted your spirits wherever you're listening to this. Of course, for much more information about his experiences and the equipment, etc., please check out his blog, selfpowered.net. There's plenty on there to start you thinking about maybe doing something similar. Until next time, folks, tread lightly as you journey, leave no trace, and take only pictures. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear more from our extensive free library, please visit the website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
You can now follow The Outdoor Station on Facebook, where we chat about each programme we produce, answer questions and discuss future productions. Why not join us there?
This podcast is produced and hosted by theoutdoorstation.co.uk.